President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama will be leaving the White House for good in just 5 weeks. He, of course, holds the distinction of being the first African-American president of the United States. But will history judge him as the most successful? A Pew Research Center poll conducted a few weeks ago on how Americans view the president as he leaves office. President Obama currently has high job approval ratings, just below 2 of his predecessors. Pew found that President Obama ranks third, just slightly behind Presidents Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, but more than twice as high as former President George W. Bush at the end of their presidencies. So let's talk about it. Obviously, I unapologetically love President Obama and the First Lady, and I believe that history is going to view him in light of everything, not just his election, but everything he has had to undergo as president of the United States, as probably being the most successful president in history. Barbara, what do you think?
Well, there's no way that history can ignore that he inherited an economy that was on the brink, that was about to collapse, that was in fact collapsing.
Yes.
And that he was successful in restoring that economy. There's no way that history can ignore that 26 million people were able to get Obamacare, as people like to call it, but health care, which they needed. There's no way that history is going to ignore the fact that he brought millions of new voters into the electorate. I mean, these are just so many of the things that he did. He's done, you know, really a remarkable job. When you look overall at the American economy, at the American, society, and he's been scandal-free. Where are the sex scandals? Where are the money scandals? Folks, have you seen any lawsuits against him?
No congressional investigations of any member of his cabinet.
I mean, just look at it. And the FLOTUS. Look at First Lady Michelle Obama.
And that's what I'm going to do right now.
Yes.
So not surprisingly, First Lady Michelle Obama has very high favorability ratings during the president's 2 terms. Mrs. Obama leaves with 72% of all Americans viewing her as favorable, while just 22% view her unfavorably. Cleo, I love this. You'll remember in 2008, there were all of the stories of, Michelle Obama, the scary, angry black woman, and the nation has fallen in love with her. Black, white, Latino. She has exceeded all expectations of the traditional First Lady. What do you think about it?
Well, I think the Obamas, both Michelle and Barack, have actively made sure that they were scandal-free.
Yes.
Have actually made sure that their optics looked good at all times, and actually made sure that they came off with hardly any blemishes.
Yeah.
And that's good. I wish that they would have been more demonstrably engaging of the black community.
Yes. So let me ask you about that. What do you mean by that? Because it's interesting to me, because we talk about how history will look at them, but within the demographic of, the history books, I wonder how the African-American community will look at both of them. There were early on articles. I remember a column, I believe, by Washington Post columnist Cortland Malloy and others who, really wanted President Obama to be demonstrably angrier. And whatever they define black manhood as being during that period of time. I personally always disagree.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that he should have been angry or quote-unquote man or whatever. I'm saying that it would have been great if he would have been demonstratively affirming or winked at the black community or did something that was directly responsive that meant that I care about you in direct ways.
So so I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Like, what didn't he do? Because I'll tell you, I sit back and I remember the picture of President Obama in the White House, and he's with a young African-American boy, and he's bent over, and the little boy can touch his hair and see, like, we look like that. He talked about Trayvon Martin, and Trayvon Martin could have been his son. Mrs. Obama talking about the young woman in Chicago who was killed by Hadia.
Yes.
Who was killed by gun violence.
Yeah.
What else could they have done, or what didn't he do? What would you have liked to have seen him do that was more demonstrably opening his arms?
To me, what you just described are optically really wonderful looks. But for example, during the murders in Chicago, he didn't show up. And when Sandy Hook when it occurred, he showed up. And black people have been, because of a historical gap in relevance on that level, we're hungry for him to be more demonstratively supportive and say things that were in line with black struggle.
But what about he was there in Barbara, he was there in Charleston after the murders in the church.
9 people had to die, though.
And, you know, there's 2 things I wish he had done. There's 3 things. 1, I wish he had spoken about systemic structural racism.
Yes.
Very early in his,
Yes.
And he didn't talk about it until Charleston. That was a mistake. I wish he had spent much more time on a jobs bill, because that's what our community needed. We need jobs.
Did we not benefit at all from any of the work done by the president or even the Congress, as much as the odds were stacked against us, that helped the African American community?
We drove down. Eventually, it took years, but eventually the African-American unemployment rates did start coming down. There's no doubt about that. It's still double, however, what the white rate is, even including for college grads, which is a tragedy. And I wish he had done more. I think they could have pushed the envelope harder on foreclosures. Because we've lost 1/3 of all African-American wealth, after the recession. And if he had pushed a little bit harder and had followed some of the recommendations to forgive, foreclosures, to help in that way, more than the HARP program, I think it would have been very, very successful. But he had bad advisors, in my vantage point.
So let me ask you, I got to turn to Flint on this. And again, I know we're talking about this in the history of things, but recently, speaking about the Obama presidency, someone that I was speaking with was talking about their enormous disappointment that the president shows up in Flint, sort of late, in their opinion, and drank the water as to demonstrate to people in Flint that the water was safe. And we, to this day, we still know that in Flint, people have to bathe their children in bottled water if they can purchase it.
Black situation.
And so why do you think that was a negative?
Well, the water was poisonous, and it gave some advice from a presidential level that you can drink this water.
Yes.
I mean, that speaks for itself.
And
it happens to be a predominantly black struggle.
So to the African American community, particularly to the residents of Flint, and I have to say, I mean, what has happened in Flint hurts me to my soul. Was that a view of betrayal by the president?
Well, I think there's a strong instinct and urge in the Democratic Party to run away from race and to always try to, quote, universalize the presidency. And that I do think that he fell into some of that trap, and we're seeing that trap right now, right? Everybody's talking about the new focus of the Democratic Party should be on the white working class.
Yes.
And which goes against any study that's been done of this recent election, which doesn't explain, how black working class and Latino working class voters voted. I mean, it's just, insane that we see this reactive, reflexive movement always in the Democratic Party to run away from race.
It's interesting, Barbara, because there is a study. I was very interested in finding out who were the black people who voted for Donald Trump.
Yes.
And what you notice is that demographic-wise, with the exception of race, the same black people who voted for Donald Trump are the same white people who voted for Donald Trump. They are overwhelmingly male, at least according to the study that I read in, I believe, The Atlantic. They're overwhelmingly male, black males, high school education or less, live in states that have lost a lot of blue-collar jobs, and overwhelmingly believe that women are oppressing men, taking jobs away from men. Of course, I'm not looking at you because I believe you think this. I'm just looking at you because you're so handsome. but they are the same people. So I say that to say that this jump to look at the white working class is not the whole solution. So it will be very interesting to look back and see what are we going to say.
Well, speaking of the election, one of the things that Michelle and Obama did, particularly Barack, was if you believe in my legacy, if you support my legacy, you will vote for Hillary. Remember, he said that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I believe that he said something to the black community in a direct way too late.
Right.
If he would have began a relationship with black people in terms of direct engagement much earlier, he would have been taken more seriously when he made that suggestion at this late in the game. Because as we can tell by who voted and who didn't vote, that people were not responsive to this legacy thing that he said.
And also, you just can't put him in a stadium. I mean, one of the things that the Dems definitely did wrong was they did not do their ground game the way they should have. And I know that as a fact.
But why wouldn't they? See, I think there's something, that's another show, but there's something psychologically going on here.
Right,
well,
exactly.
and the psychological piece, I believe, completely anecdotal, is what you refer to as the zigzag of racial justice in this country and civil rights. The same people who voted for Barack Obama for two terms, voted for Donald Trump. I think that what we are seeing is the country had not only Democrat fatigue, but black man fatigue, and voted for the complete opposite.
I think
racism.
And I do. So, but that's to remember, she beat him in the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. So, and remember that Bush got, what, 12%, 8 to 12% of the black male vote again. This is a traditional kind of reaction. We knew that there would be a, what we call the reset after the Obama high. Obama got the bump. What she didn't get was the women's bump. That's what kills her presidency.
Except for, our women, black women voted for her. She should have gotten the white women vote. She lost the white women's vote.
And that's what hurt her.
We have to go to a break in a minute, but I want to end this with saying I believe if the president had been more demonstrably pro-black in his presidency, I think that the backlash that we're seeing with Trump supporters now would have been 100% worse.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. NewsOne Now with Roland Martin, every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.